Welcome back to the Cruise Elite podcast. Tony's with me. Tony, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning. We're overcoming some technical difficulties, but otherwise it's very nice to hear and see you.
Yes. I hope we're overcoming the technical difficulties for sure. How are you? How you been? What's new?
I've been good. It's the most boring thing to say. I've been busy, but
yeah.
I feel like it does kind of capture what I've been doing. I just did a 10-day run of gigs every night, plus the podcast stuff that I usually do.
Wow.
And then we just got kittens like a month or two ago. So
Oh, really?
Between caring for these living creatures and working a ton, I'm kind of missing like nice long nights of sleep without, having to stay up late or having to wake up early. That's where I'm at right now.
Nice. Yeah. So those gigs, they all go late, don't they?
It depends.
Yeah.
Like some of them I'll be done around like 10 or something, that's not so bad. But some of them it's like I'm not getting home until 3 something in the
Gotcha.
morning. And then I can never just fall right asleep. Like that's just not, especially if it's like I've just been in a loud concert environment running around, like I'm amped up. So even if I'm like exhausted, I need like an hour to wind down. Yeah, so that's how I've been. What about you?
I've been busy as well. So we had our enrollment for the Neuro Dojo, right? And it was
That's right. That's right.
And it went great. We have an awesome new group of students. So we're really excited about that. We are like 3 live calls into the course. So tomorrow we have a call, and it's actually a really important one because we are starting to look at gait analysis. So it's a whole call on teaching people how to analyze gait. And we have multiple students that have submitted gait videos, and we're going to analyze them together. And it's an opportunity for me to point out what I see and teach our movement professionals how to start to analyze gait on their clients. And then we have also some non-movement professionals who are just going to be really just nerding out and learning how to analyze their own gait. And we basically figure out what it means, and then we correlate it to other assessments that we've run thus far. So it's an important one. And I was just working on the slideshow before meeting with you. So that's what I've been doing. And besides that, I'm 1 foot out the door because we leave for Maine on Thursday. We're going up north. Yeah, we're going up north every single year. We go to a really cool area in Maine around Moosehead Lake. And we rent a cabin. It's right there on a pond, beautiful view. And then there's a nearby river. And so I'll get to do some fly fishing. So I'm looking forward to it.
You got like a real like Emersonian Thoreau vibe,
Yep.
It's like I want to go to this pond up in the north with like a babbling brook.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is definitely one of my more favorite ways or things to do when we get away is to just go to the North Country. And, as long as it involves fly fishing, I'm pretty happy.
So when you're out fishing, what's the family up to?
So it's this sort of program that we're going to be on for this one is one that my wife graciously has learned to accept because I'll have a buddy with me who's also a very avid fly fisherman. And so kind of the program is wake up super early in the morning when it's pitch black, make coffee, grab a quick bite to eat, and we're out the door. And so we're fishing like first light for, into maybe 2 or 3 hours. And then we come back, just kind of hang out for the day, do the lunch thing, maybe drive down the road, check out one of the parks. And then evening rolls around and we want to be back out on the water. So we're fishing for a few hours again, and then we come back and do dinner. So my wife she's a good sport on this trip because once I have a buddy there, we get pretty intense.
Yeah. MVP, Alicia, right there.
Yes, exactly.
Here I am complaining about sleep, and this is what you do for fun. You're like, I'm going to wake up at the crack of dawn.
Oh, dude, nothing gets me out of bed as like fishing. Like if it's not fishing, I'm like, oh, and then, my wife laughs about it too. Cause like even in the middle of the summer, because it's light out earlier, it's not uncommon for me to get up at 3 a.m.
Mhm.
Yeah, and get out there. But if I had to do that for work, maybe not.
Right. Isn't that crazy? It's just like the power of the mind.
Yes.
There's that like I don't even know where this comes from, but there's that adage. It's like instead of saying I have to do this, say I get to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
And like me and my buddy, we were kind of like joking. We were like joking, complaining about shit that we had to do, and we were like, "No,
Mhm.
I get to do this. Like I get
Yeah,
to
yeah.
clean my cat's poop. Like
Yeah,
good
yeah.
for me." But it actually works. Like I actually find when I start saying that to myself, it
Right,
like
right.
I like do think about like, yeah, because I have kittens, it's awesome, or like, yeah, because I have this gig where I'm gonna go mix a cool band, or do an awesome podcast or whatever. So I do think it actually works, even though it seems like it shouldn't.
Yes, yes. Oh, hey, before I forget, your Cruise Elite t-shirt has
Yes.
made it from the box into a package. The package is sitting behind me and it just needs to get out the door. So you will have that t-shirt at some point, but today is my ultimate reminder to get that to
Okay.
you.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to wear it on the pod.
Nice.
It'll be a good little birthday present.
Yeah, you can represent with a uniform.
There you go. There you go. So yeah, let's get into the topic for the day.
Let's do it.
One of the things that has really intrigued me about your practice is when you talk about taking a history.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure that's the phrasing that you use, right? Taking a
Yes.
history. And you'll be telling us a story about one of your clients and a persistent problem that you're trying to solve. And it'd be like, oh, okay, so like when I was taking the history, discovered X, Y, and Z. And sometimes you'll even be like, I realized I wasn't on the right track. So I went back and went back to the history and did it again and tried to
Mhm.
figure out if there was something I had missed. And I just thought it would be so cool to learn more about that process. What is taking a history? What are you doing it for? What's your
Right.
process? And then go from there.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. In fact, it's interesting because history taking is probably, in my opinion, the most important thing that you could do as a trainer or a coach or a health professional. And it's something that there isn't a lot of formal education on it. And in fact, I'm now realizing like we need to talk more about history taking in the Neuro Dojo.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things that just gets grazed over because you sort of assume that it's easy to ask people some questions, but as soon as you're put in a place to ask those questions, it's like, well, what am I supposed to ask? Like, what matters?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
really, for me now, history taking is the most important thing that I can do to understand the person that I'm going to be working with. It's something that I do on the first session with every single person that I work with. And if I get the opportunity to work with somebody for a long period of time, it's actually something that I'm going back to. And I don't mean necessarily just to review the history that I have, but also to improve the history that I have, to learn more about the individual. Because as a coach, the longer you work with somebody, the more you learn and you start to get keyed in on their behaviors, which you don't really have a lot of information about on day one because you might
Mm-hmm.
not know that person. But as you spend more and more time with them and you not only see them get to move, which gives you a lot of data, you start to pick up on their behaviors just through conversation. And that is where you really start to see the whole picture, is when you have their history of, like, say, past injuries, but now you're starting to learn about how they live their life
Mm-hmm.
and you're putting those pieces of information together. And it really helps inform you as the coach. And it can, I mean, it's amazing how well it can help you kind of expedite the process of figuring out what makes the most sense to train, right? And in my world, being, looking at things through the lens of the brain and the nervous system, what brain areas make the most sense to target? And you can actually
Mm-hmm.
collect a lot of information on that through a person's history over time. The interesting thing about history taking is most people don't have experience with it because even in today's, modern healthcare world, right? You don't really get your actual history taken. It's kind of crazy and it's even a little bit scary. So last week, I went to the dentist and I hadn't been in a while and I was getting a little bit of sensation in one of my molars. And it turned out that I had an old filling from like when I was 10 years old, had just basically broken down.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a cavity forming kind of underneath it where it had been breaking down. So I had to get some work done on that tooth. And so the night before they had emailed me some history stuff to fill out. And so the night before I'm scrambling because I remembered, oh shoot, they emailed me something. I got to fill it out. So I print out like page after page after page. And I'm like, geez, this is not how I want to spend my evening. And so I'm filling this out and I'm checking boxes and this and that. And I'm like, I was already thinking about my conversation that I'm going to have with you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm like, this is so interesting because I have not gone through any kind of history taking process on myself in a long time. But I'm looking at these questions and I'm like, this is just your typical health history where they're just trying to make sure that you're not in a dangerous place to go there. And, you're not going to keel over while they're, doing stuff to your teeth.
Right, right.
And it's more like, does diabetes run in your family? Like, does heart disease run in your family? Do you take any medications? Things like that. So that's a history, right? That's a history, but it's not the type of history that I'm really talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. When in terms of what I like to, how I like to spend my time with a client on day one, talking about, their injury history and so on and so forth. So I was kind of chuckling over that because when I got to the dentist and I handed them the history, nobody looked at it. It just I could tell it just got filed away. So then I was
just
like,
a liability thing.
It's like, dude, so that's just a liability history because nobody even looked at it. And then when I finally got to the part where I was, with the doctor, they asked me a couple questions about the symptoms I was experiencing, but that was it. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of chuckling to myself and I'm like, man, in today's world with healthcare, most of the time you actually don't get your actual history taken. And it's concerning, but taking a real history can actually take time. Like it could be an hour conversation with a person. And that sounds wild, but many times, more times than I could possibly count, I have met with somebody and day one was only history taking. That's not like how I intend it to go, but each person is different and each person has their own unique history. Sometimes it does go quite fast. Sometimes it takes an hour. And I was just chuckling when nobody looked at my history. And the week actually before that, I was thinking about this too. We were out for a walk, my family and I, and we were talking to one of our neighbors. And she had told me about some ankle pain she was having. And this was like months ago. And she explained what she was feeling. And I was like, yeah, that kind of sounds like you might have maybe some peroneal nerve irritation. That's a peripheral nerve that runs through your lower body. And if it were irritated, it absolutely could, maybe give you some symptoms in the front of the ankle is a common place. So she was telling me about some symptoms like, yeah, that might be a peroneal nerve thing. And she ended up kind of going through the cycle, saw some doctors and stuff. And she told me that day when we were walking, she was like, hey, Taylor, you were right. That's a peroneal nerve problem. And I was like, oh, really? And she basically said, yeah. And they told me because I had already done physical therapy, but it was unsuccessful, the next thing that they could do is fuse my tibia, my tib fib. And I was like, what? This lady who's in her 60s is a generally healthy person. She's standing here on two legs talking to me about her ankle pain that honestly isn't even that bad, right? She's still like being active. And just because she went through this kind of process with her doctors, and nobody could understand why she was having ankle pain and why physical therapy didn't solve it. The next idea was to make her bones fuse so she couldn't move them anymore. And this is a
Mm.
healthy person. And I was just like,
That's
whoa,
extreme.
this
Yeah.
is crazy. And so we were talking, and she wanted my validation that that wasn't a good idea. And I could sense that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, yeah, you should run from those people because you basically haven't even done anything yet. No offense, but you haven't done anything yet. And yes, you can overcome it. And so I was like, just out of curiosity, did your doctor take your history? And she was like, no. And I was like, nothing. I was like, wow. She said they didn't ask her any questions. And it was just interesting to me because in talking to her for 5 minutes, one of the things that she said was 3 weeks before going to the doctor, she had a cortisone shot in her sacroiliac joint on the same side as
Hmm.
where she was getting some of these symptoms. And I was like, that's crazy to me. Like, they don't know anything about her. They don't even know that she was there 3 weeks ago and got a cortisone shot on the same side. So, which absolutely could be involved in what she has going on. So at that moment, I was just like, yeah, this is perspective because most people never get their history taken. And if you take a
Yeah.
history, you learn so much about the individual. It informs you so well. And for me personally, it helps me make a lot of decisions about the work that I'm going to do with that person.
Yeah. That's crazy. It's clear that there's power in taking a full history of someone, really trying to understand what they've been through, what they've dealt with, what could be causing some of these issues.
Right.
What does that process look like? Like, it sounds like it's a conversation, it's almost an interview.
Yes.
But do you have like a system? Like, do you have a place that you always start and then you kind of follow those leads? Do you have
Yeah.
like, I'm going to hit these 7 pillars of, topics that can help me figure it out? Are they,
Yeah.
tell me all about it.
Yeah. So it's fairly systematic. It's definitely in my mind at this point.
Hmm.
It does change a little bit based on who I'm talking to and what they have going on and why they've come to work with me. And now most people at this point in my career are coming to me with a movement problem or a pain issue, maybe both. And so I always start with goals. I really want to know, why is the person here? What do they want to accomplish? And I want to know what they want to accomplish on our first call together. And at this point, I don't know how long the history taking process is going to take.
Hmm.
It's on average, I can probably get through a history in a half hour. And it still sounds long to some people, I know. But then I have another 30 minutes or so to run the person through some actual movement assessments that I can then correlate to what I learned in their history. So, like on average. Now, in the conversation, I start with goals because I want to know what they want to accomplish on day one for 2 reasons. One, I want to try to accomplish that on day one. Like some
Mm.
people, like if I can do that, if I can find out at least one thing that they find that's important to them, and then we can make some immediate progress towards that thing,
Hmm.
I really feel like it helps build rapport and get them excited and get them
Yeah.
engaged in the process because
Yeah.
most people, when they come to me, they don't know what's possible. I mean, honestly, I'm usually the last coach that people work with. Like, that's kind of like how I look at myself. Like, they've tried all this stuff, like,
Hmm.
whatever, let's just go one step further and try to do something that's completely new. And at that point, because people have lost a lot of hope in the process of trying to find things that are helping them with their issues, they don't really know what's possible. So if I can help them make progress on day one and move towards that one thing and make progress, it really shifts the energy and really helps engage them. So I always want to know their goals for that reason. I also don't know if they're coming back, right? So like that's the whole interesting thing about being a coach. Like, I'm prepared to support a person for years. I also don't know if they're even going to follow up once.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important to me to try to show them what's possible in one session, because that usually will give them the motivation to kind of move forward with the
Yeah.
process and really commit themselves. So I love starting with goals, and it also kind of shows me where they want to go long term. Like how would they use their body if they could have the body that they wanted, right? Because maybe they've been in pain for a long time. And so then from there, once I understand those goals, we just usually move into an injury history, right? Because that's like what people expect, I think. It's like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
tell me about the injuries you've had in the past. And so that list can be short for some people and it can be really long for other people. It
Mm-hmm.
just depends. And that's just my kind of moment where I just say, "Hey, I want you to talk." Right? And I'm just going to sit here, take some notes if I think it's important, and I'll have some questions for you when you're done. And so people just kind of rattle off like, "Oh, I had, this knee thing and that ankle thing, and I don't know if it's important, but 15 years ago, my left shoulder." And I'm like, "Yes, that's important." And that's kind of an
Mm-hmm.
educational moment where I'm like, "I actually want you to tell me everything that you feel is significant, even if you're thinking that it was too long ago." And
Mm-hmm.
as soon as people learn that I actually want to know everything, they start giving me information that they didn't even come prepared to give. Like they'll be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know if it matters, but like, does it matter that I had asthma as a kid?" And I'm like, "Yes." Right. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely matters. Like, I want to know that stuff. And from there, after we go through the whole injury history, I usually have specific questions. If they had a surgery or something, I might want to know more about that. Like, "Hey, tell me about the scar that you have from that surgery. How
Mm-hmm.
big is it?" And they might point it out. And then I'm asking questions like, "Did you get your sensation back?" Right? "Does that scar feel weird to you?" And they're like, "Oh, you know what? It is still numb." And oftentimes, I feel my clothing kind of brushes up against it and makes it hypersensitive. Like, I'm actually interested in that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so once we go through that injury history, I kind of have a pretty good idea of a lot of places I might start, but I then start asking them questions about what I call a midline history. And so a midline history is, I basically want to know a lot of information on all of the structures in anatomy that lives in the middle, so in the center of your body. So, for example, I might start up high and I'll say, "Okay, have you ever had a concussion?" We're going to start with your head,
Mm-hmm.
right? "Have you ever had a concussion?" And that's really important to me, right? And then from there, I'll say, "All right, tell me about your eyes, right? Do you wear glasses? Do you wear contact lenses?" And I get a lot of information, that tells me other stuff that might be important. Some people actually already know they have fairly significant vision issues. Other people are just like, "Yep, I wear corrective lenses, contact lenses, and that's about it." And I just kind of start moving down the center of the body. So then
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, "Have you ever had any like real serious dental surgeries or any dental work gone wrong? Tell me about your jaw. Tell me about your teeth." Then we kind of move
Mm-hmm.
into the spine, right? "Tell me about your
Mm-hmm.
spine, any injuries, any pain, any surgeries." And I'm just working down. And when you do that, they start giving you a lot of information about things that they never even necessarily thought were important.
Yeah.
And that really gives me some good information, because as a neuro guy, I'm working with higher order systems all the time. All right. So
Yeah.
if you tell me you have neck pain and you also are saying that you have vision problems and you just recently found out that you have a hearing issue, I'm now starting to be like, "Oh, well, it's likely that your vision problem and your hearing issue is actually behind why you have neck pain." Right? So there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of little connections you can make when you run a good midline history.
Yeah. So you're looking to kind of synthesize all those little things, the scar tissue and the deficits and everything, and
Yeah.
then see, okay, where in these higher order systems could this problem actually reside.
Yes.
You're looking for clues, right?
I'm looking for clues. Exactly. And it doesn't, even a good history is not going to tell you like everything. You're not going to have a perfect idea of where to start and what to do, but it does fast forward that process.
Hmm.
It's funny when I first got into the industry as a coach, I had that great gig that I told you and our listeners about when I was studying the Burdenko method.
Yeah.
And I was working kind of as Igor Burdenko's right hand man. Basically, I just followed him around and got these great opportunities. And so I started seeing clients out of the place where he was working eventually. And I still remember he came. I had this like little office area, and he came into the office and he put down an old school stethoscope and blood pressure cuff on my desk.
Hmm.
And he was like, "It's going to be hard to imitate him, but I wish I could do it really well because it's just great." But he was like, "You will take everybody's blood pressure," and I was like, straight out of college, excited to be like a personal trainer and
Hmm.
teach people the Burdenko method. And this guy's telling me I have to take my client's blood pressure, which, by
Hmm.
the way, was never mentioned anywhere in my education.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And I just sort of like, brushed it off. I was like, all right, how am I going to like make this guy think I'm taking people's blood pressure? Because guess what? I don't even know how to use that thing.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I don't know how, and I didn't want to ask him. And then in the back of my mind, I was like, why should I care about my client's blood pressure? We're here to get stronger and improve our balance and
Hmm.
improve our endurance and our mobility. Who cares about blood pressure? And then he was also like, you will watch everybody walk. And I was
Hmm.
like, what, Igor? Why would I want to watch my client walk? I was like, that sounds so boring. And so right away, he's telling me you got to take everybody's blood pressure and you got to watch them walk. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. And so I literally didn't. And it wasn't until like 10 years later, I was like, oh, I should have listened to him. But at least I've arrived at this point where now I understand that blood pressure is a phenomenal marker of health. And
Hmm.
I should know my client's blood pressure and I should know how to take that. And their walking gait is one of the most important things that I could look at as well after the history taking process, because it will give me a lot of, data that I can use. And he always would tell me like, you got to ask people questions, right? You got to learn about them. You got to
Hmm.
understand like what is their injury history. And that stuff was so boring to me at the beginning and I didn't understand its relevance.
Yeah.
Luckily, I arrived at a place where now I do. But if you're a movement professional and you're kind of, and you're just working with people, they walk in and, you just kind of start training. Trust me, you want to start to basically build your own history taking process, right? You don't have to do it any certain way, like whatever works for you over time with practice. But man, is it important.
Man, that's awesome. I would love to meet Igor someday. That would
Yeah.
be
He's
super
a
cool.
character. Great, great man.
Yeah. In your history, so you start with injuries
Yeah,
and you kind of go through there, and then you do a midline from top to bottom.
exactly.
From there, you just go down whatever other kind of clues you're getting and
Yeah.
ask more
So
questions.
yep. So from there, I will now start to kind of hone in on the actual reason they're seeing me. All right. So, they've got knee pain, they've got back pain, whatever the case might be. And I ask them what happened before what happened happened. All right. And we just
Yeah.
kind of laugh.
Yeah.
It's like, what happened before what happened happened? And we start running a little timeline history on like what happened before you had back pain. Because a
Hmm.
lot of times when people start creating that timeline in their mind, they're like, oh gosh, I never even connected this, but I was in a minor car accident
Hmm.
and I everything's cool. And I didn't really, I wasn't like seriously injured or anything, but man, my neck was sore for about 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
or I was in a long-term stressful situation, right? I had a job that I didn't like, and it was causing me a ton of stress long term, and it really took its toll on me. And yeah, after a couple years of that, it's kind of funny. I just all of a sudden started developing this health issue, this movement issue. I ask them that question, and then I just from there try to get as targeted to their main priority, the main thing that they want to work on. And I then start to try to get educated on what they have tried already that either
Mm.
has helped them or hasn't helped them. Because the amazing thing about understanding applied neurology is that the information you get from learning what has not helped somebody is just as powerful and useful as the information that has. So we literally make a list. I have the person make a list. So they're like, oh, I tried acupuncture, I tried dry needling, and I tried
Mm-hmm.
Graston therapy, and they're kind of going through this list of all these like
And
little
I took
interventions.
ibuprofen and
Yep, all
yeah.
that stuff. Yeah, all that stuff. I tried, this kind of manual massage work, and I just have them put these things on the list of what helped, what didn't. Right there, I'm just kind of looking at those things, and I'm looking for clues. And I tell people, even if that thing you feel only gave you temporary relief, I still want to know about it. I don't want you to be like, "Oh, that failed."
Yeah,
Because a
that's so
lot of
clue.
yeah, because a lot of times what I find is that people do encounter interventions that give them temporary relief. The problem is they didn't follow up enough, and that thing was not combined with the other right things to help them long term. Because you can't expect much from laying down on a table, having a therapy provided to you, and then you just go about your life, and it's like, oh shoot, I missed my Friday appointment. Well, I'll just go, next Friday, and all of a sudden 2 weeks have passed since this itty bitty little stimulus was applied to your brain and body. There's no reason why that should help.
Yeah.
But if it helped you temporarily, and maybe you felt good for a few hours that day or maybe several days, I want to know about it, because in my work, I can run that intervention through my filter
Mm-hmm.
and be like, what about this thing could have helped this person? Right?
Yeah.
Because I might be able to use similar tools to create a similar stimulus and include that in their training. And so
Yeah.
I love learning about the things that may have helped them even a little bit. And equally as much, I like looking at the list of things that didn't go well, right? Because sometimes people will say, hey, I tried deep tissue massage work and dry needling,
Mm-hmm.
and it went really bad. I actually had more pain,
Mm-hmm.
the week after or something. And then I can start to run that through my filter with what I know about receptors. And I can just be thinking about, all right, well, it seems like this person's brain was interpreting that intervention as threatening.
Mm-hmm.
So that saves me a little guesswork. And now I can kind of approach things a little bit differently and smarter based on what they're telling me.
Yeah. Okay. So now it's getting more and more targeted as we go down this list.
Exactly.
So you get their goals, you get their injuries, you do the midline, and then you ask about what interventions they've tried and whether they were good or not.
Yes. And actually, let me add this, Tony, because this is important. I'm just looking at a few bulleted notes that I wrote down here. So when people come to me with pain issues, like chronic, long-standing pain issues, I ask a couple of questions that they're amazing questions. They give me so much information and help me find a starting point. I will first say or ask, all right, when you wake up in the morning, are you in pain or do you feel good? Right? Because some people will say, hey, when I wake up in the morning, I feel like a train wreck. But
Mm-hmm.
then as I start to move, right, and go about my day, in their words, they're like, I start to get warmed up,
Mm-hmm.
and then my pain becomes less. And at that point, I feel like I'm functioning better. So I ask people, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? do you wake up in the morning and feel lousy, but then as you continue to move through the day, do you feel better?
Mhm.
And they might say yes or no. And then I say, or do you wake up in the morning and you actually feel great? Like you feel rested?
Mhm.
Because some people will tell you, I wake up in the morning, I feel rested, I got good sleep, and my pain is gone. I start my day without discomfort. But
Yeah.
they will then tell you 4 o'clock rolls around and I start to feel like crap. And then by, the afternoon into the evening, that's when my whatever pain starts to get worse. So, do you wake up in the morning and feel lousy, move during your day, and then start to feel better, right? Or do you wake up in the morning and you have no pain, you feel rested, and then do you start to feel worse as the day goes on? That just gives you great insight. Here's the insight. So, if you're a person that wakes up in the morning and you feel like crap, you have pain immediately, but as you start to move, you start to improve, that usually tells me that you just need more of the right activation more
Mhm.
frequently in your life,
Mhm.
right? Some people are not getting the right movement, right? They're not getting the right dose of the movement. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, cool. I just have to learn how to provide this person the right stimulus, and we have to do it enough to make a difference,
Mhm.
right? And there might be some habit stuff that we need to work into there because maybe this is a person that hasn't carved out enough time in their life to get the movement frequently enough into their day, right? So we might have
Mhm.
to, do some work there. But that is not that hard, right? That's the
Yeah.
person that adopts, honestly, almost any movement practice.
Yeah, they start working out and suddenly they start feeling better and the pain's
Like,
less and they have more
seriously, like,
energy and yeah.
doesn't have to be my movement practice, doesn't have to be what I'm excited about necessarily as the coach. Like, this person's not that hard to work with. I'd say the more challenging part is if they're the person that just hasn't carved out enough time in their life. Because now you're into habit change stuff,
Yeah.
and that's just going to take longer, right? That's one of the biggest challenges as a coach is when you have to help a person change their habits. So when I hear that, I'm like, all right, cool. I've got to work on some habit change, and I just have to get this person, honestly, doing my mobility program. Like,
Mhm.
I got to teach them my systematic approach to joint mobility, because if we can get them more activation and clarify the map, right? We've had those conversations about increasing
Mhm.
proprioception. Chances are they're going to feel better. And a lot of times that solves people's issues over time, or it fixes, let's say, 70% of the problems. And then at that point, maybe we have to get a little bit more targeted in what we're doing. So,
Yeah. One phrase you used before
yeah.
is, you've got to eliminate the noise. So if you get
Hmm.
that person moving and clarify their map, and then you still have a sticky problem, now it's like, well, I know that we've already kind of cleared away this stuff. Now I can
Yes.
zero in on these other confounding variables, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So we kind of laid the foundation. And then at that point, we might have to get more targeted. So now the other person, right? Person B here, who they wake up feeling rested, they feel recovered, they're waking up with no pain, but then they're telling you that as the day goes on, they start to feel worse. By the time it's time to go to bed, they're in pain, they feel achy, stiff, whatever. This person is more tricky. Oftentimes, what this person is telling you is that they have a higher order issue. And what that means is that we then have to consider some of the higher order senses. Two of those things that would come to mind right away would be the visual system and the vestibular system, because people don't know this, but a lot of the fatigue that we feel is visual fatigue.
Mm.
And if you are feeling great to start your day, but then as you continuously move, if you have visual threats or vestibular threats, like your inner ear, right? Balance problems, that stuff really overflows the threat bucket fast, right? Those systems. And so I'm not saying that this is absolute, like it's always going to be the eyes and the inner ear,
Mhm.
but it is often a huge part of the problem. So somebody that has vestibular problems, as the day goes on and their brain feels more and more threatened by the fact that that system isn't working optimally, they're going to be building more tension in their body. Or the person that has either visual issues, or they're forced into a lot of visual fatigue because maybe they're a 9 to 5 desk jockey and they're staring at a
Mm-hmm.
computer screen all day long under fluorescent lights in an office room. They don't get the movement breaks. It's zapping their energy and giving them a lot of visual fatigue. That could be causing them, some of these ongoing pain issues, or the buildup of these pain issues throughout the day. Right. And then once they go to sleep and they get fully recovered, they feel good all over again, and then repeat the process. So it really, like, the higher order thing becomes more technical, because now you have to start thinking about assessing people's higher order systems to figure out, like, what is the main threat? Because, like, even stuff like your hearing matters, right? We go into a lot of our brain based assessments at that point to figure out what might be going on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed I have like one of those earpieces, those Bluetooth earpieces, and it's like one side. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll like be listening to a podcast or something while I'm walking around. And then like someone will be talking to me, and like maybe I don't pause it right away or whatever. And I notice that just like I get like it stresses me out. It's like I'm hearing two different things in two
Mm,
different ears, and I'm like trying to parse the meaning of both. And I notice like I like get irritable. And it took like that happening a few times for me to realize, oh, it's not that like I'm being interrupted, or like it's not. I think it's actually something going on with my brain having to figure out two
interesting.
different sounds in each ear.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be quite fatiguing too. Irritating.
Yeah, I could see that. So like the one piece headset's really convenient, but now I'm like, maybe this isn't something I should have planted in my ear for an hour every day or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I have to consider that thinking too when I'm building drills for people, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm the guy who's always looking for underperforming systems,
Mm-hmm.
and then I create drills to stimulate those systems.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you have to be careful of with applied neurology type work is that a system that has been underperforming for a very long time can have a hard time dealing with constant stimulus. And so you can become irritable by applying a stimulus for too long.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like the minimal effective dose thing that we're
Yeah.
always teaching. And that's
Yeah.
why we're assessing and reassessing to see, like, hey, even though we might have the right stimulus here, are we using it for too long? Because your nervous system can actually get stressed out even by the right stuff. And you just have to be mindful of that.
Yeah. It's the golden mean, right? You want to
Yeah,
apply enough to activate, but not so much that you overstimulate it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you want to know what's wild too? We haven't talked about it yet, but we'll get to it someday. We talk a lot about finding underperforming systems and then activating them, because
Mm-hmm.
most of the time we're activating stuff. However, there's also inhibition tools. So neurology is basically, I look at it as like a dial, right? We're either turning stuff up or we're
Mm-hmm.
turning it down. And we're trying to do
Mm-hmm.
that to find the right balance that creates, optimal performance and decreases pain. And so there's actually several tools that we use in applied neuro that inhibit parts of the brain. So we
Mm-hmm.
turn that dial down, and those can be amazing tools for people.
That would be a really cool episode, I think.
Yeah. It's funny, like they're easy too. Like wearing sunglasses. Like, what is that? It's inhibition for the brain. You're down regulating light information, right? Coming in through the eye. Wearing a single earplug, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are all potential inhibition tools. And sometimes we do those things to help in the situation where somebody's becoming overstimulated by a certain set of drills. We might have to then apply some inhibition to kind of calm things down, or balance things in a sometimes even what seems like an asymmetrical way.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how that can work.
So I'm curious, do you ever in your history talk about illness? Like you mentioned asthma, like as it might come up sort of casually, but do you ever go through kind of like an inventory of
Definitely.
illness or anything
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, definitely. And people are usually pretty good to bring that stuff up if they've had any kind of chronic illness that, they feel is significant. But a history of certain kinds of illness actually is very important to me. Sometimes what I find out through a history taking process is that a person might have low immune function. And
Mhm.
and that would actually be very important for me to know too, because as soon as you tell me that, I'm starting to think about certain brain areas without going into the weeds too much. An area of the brain called the insula, also the vagus nerve, which is like the anti-inflammatory pathway.
Mhm.
If people are telling me that they've been getting chronic infections, that stuff really can help you understand the whole story. And I like to know about asthma, like we said, breathing dysfunction, right? We have a whole episode on breathing. It's so important from a fuel capacity standpoint, right? If
Mhm.
somebody has asthma, if they have chronic allergies, anything that can disrupt breathing patterns or create lower immune function, that absolutely matters.
Yeah. And then how about training history? Do you go over like, "Hey, I used to be a jogger and then I got into CrossFit and then now I'm really into Tai Chi." Like, do you go through that kind of
Yeah,
fitness
I
journey?
do a little bit. Yeah, so that might vary from person to person, but I if I get curious, I'll definitely ask that. I often ask questions to find out if a person is a stimulus seeker, is what I call them,
Mm. Yeah.
right? Because so on day one, I can't get into behaviors really because I don't know you that well,
Mhm.
and I don't want it to feel too invasive.
Mhm.
I The behaviors thing kind of comes later on after we build rapport, we become friends, we get the opportunity to work together for a longer period of time. Then I start to see behaviors, learn about them through stories and stuff, just talking. And people then, I think, feel a little bit. What happens with me is once we get to a certain point with our training together, people like to offer up information because they know I actually care.
Yeah.
They know I actually want to know it. And they're like, "Oh, I forgot to tell you this one thing." So I often do ask about like exercise history, if you were trying different things, if you were dedicated to one kind of movement philosophy for a long time. Maybe I learned that you haven't really been a consistent exerciser ever, but there's a certain kind of person that I think is a stimulus seeker.
Mhm.
And a lot of times what I find is some people, whether they know it or not, have become kind of addicted to high intensity cardiovascular exercise. Maybe they like something like CrossFit, or I learn about other activities that they like. It could be something like Tai Chi, like you said, right? Because
Mhm.
every activity I can kind of run through a filter and understand why the person might be seeking it out. And that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, like what part of the brain does this light up? So
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly. And everyone sort of has a tendency to gravitate towards the things that are giving them something,
Mhm.
right? It's giving them something that's useful. That said, they might overdose themselves. We see that a lot,
Mhm.
right? In fact, we've talked a lot about people that I categorize as fuel clients, where they need to improve their fuel capacity. Interestingly enough, a lot of these folks, at least the ones who are really active, are addicted to some form of high intensity exercise.
Yeah.
And they'll tell you like I can't go without that. Like that's my jam.
Yeah,
And
I
when
know
you
people if they don't
yep.
go for their run for the day, like it
Yeah.
throws off their whole vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, and sure, like movement is a fantastic way to energize yourself, but what we sometimes see with individuals who have long-standing fuel deficits is that they're using high intensity exercise to give themselves, I guess I would call it, kind of a false energy, because the high intensity exercise and the cascade of hormones
Endorphins.
that
Yeah.
yeah that is released as a result of the high intensity work, they're kind of using that as their energy, right? So they become dependent on it. And you can see that in people, like you start to learn, okay, this person probably is a fuel capacity issue. They're talking about having different nutritional sensitivities, right? Food sensitivities. And, sure enough, they're addicted to cardio. And that's kind of what they're doing is they're making up for the fuel capacity issue
Mm.
by giving themselves energy based on the stress hormones that come from it. And at the same time, they're probably liking the feeling of increasing their CO2 and having that sensation of air hunger, because that in itself will also help fuel your body. The CO2 helps to deliver oxygen to your tissues, right? So it's interesting to run things through the filter and learn about people's activities because yeah, people are usually seeking something out for a very specific reason, and that can give you good information.
So, when would you go back and do a second history? Because you have mentioned that a few times.
Yeah. So I'll do that. I'll collect more information if I'm feeling like a little lost with hitting the target, right? I'll go
Hmm.
back and I'll collect information. I'll ask questions. And if I get the opportunity to work with somebody for, let's say, a year or more, I feel like I'm probably running through the history conversation, although it will be a shorter version. I'm running through that history conversation every 6 months or so, I think would be,
Hmm.
if I think about it. And that could just be a 5 minute conversation one day,
Yeah.
right? Before we, as we're getting warmed up and before we're training. Or that could be a longer conversation, a 20-minute conversation, because now they understand my process and they feel like all the information matters. And so
Yeah.
now they're offering up things that they didn't offer up before. So I'd
Hmm.
say like every 6 months, I'm kind of redoing a history, seeing what I can learn and seeing if any of that is going to help us in our journey together with achieving goals.
Has there ever been like a eureka moment that came in one of those second or third or fourth histories where it was like, man, this was the missing piece?
Yes. Yeah, that happens. It happens a fair amount. Honestly, what usually happens is I am suspicious of something
Hmm.
and I get that validated for me,
Got it.
right? That's generally how it happens because again, I'm starting to learn about the person and see their behaviors. And
Hmm.
I never want it to feel like an invasive thing, because you have to kind of read an individual and feel how comfortable they are with the conversation because, for example, if you're talking to a female athlete, you know, that female might not feel like it's important on day one to tell you that she's been without her period for 10 years,
Right.
right?
Right.
But then, like, as you build a relationship, 6 months down the road, she might be like, oh, by the way, like, I have this known hormone thing. And then, like, I haven't had my period in 10 years. And, like, do you think that could be related to this? Right. And so, like, I might be suspicious of that because they're already telling me that they have a number of digestive sensitivities and
Hmm.
all these other things that kind of could be put in that, hormonal health category. And they happen to be the person that's addicted to cardiovascular exercise, right? And so I'm suspicious of it. And then they offer that up, and it's like, okay, yeah. So this kind of validates what I was thinking. And now, because they've put that out there, I feel comfortable kind of moving forward with some new ideas. And
Hmm.
they have that educational moment where they're like, oh, we can actually work on this. And then
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, remember? Like we can actually work on everything to some degree. And it's just fun like that, right? Because applied neurology, it's the most holistic, right? It all matters, and you can consider all of it for helping to target people's issues.
Yeah. And I'm sure for the same reasons that you might not talk about this on day one with other things, but like it's like trauma or just like kind of like difficult life events.
Yes.
Is that something that comes up as well?
Yep. I don't ask about them. I don't ask
Yeah.
anything about that. Again, it's like as a coach, like over the time, you just kind of learn what's appropriate and what you actually need. I
Yeah.
have to be careful about, it sounds silly, but I have to be careful about finding too many problems, right? Because
Mhm.
it's easy to find problems. It's really easy. Like you can find problems with anybody. Like it's not easy to fix them, right? And so
Sure.
early on in my career, I was like finding out probably too much and
Interesting.
probably even running too many assessments initially because I was fired up about, this work and all the different things that I could do. And now I've kind of come full circle back where I'm like, at the beginning here, we got to be careful not to get too much information, not to ask too many questions. Things that matter they'll just come to the surface eventually. And it's always up to the person and what they are comfortable offering up. And the thing is, again, one of the beautiful things about applied neuro work is you don't have to know necessarily about a history of trauma in order to help a person feel better from that through using movement as a delivery system,
Right.
which is
Right.
great
You can
because,
already target systems from other clues. You can do
yep,
assessments, and you can start
yes,
working on the problem and not have ever gone
yep,
into that.
that's right. Because some people don't want that to be a part of the experience. And then there will be other people on day one who literally tell you about it on day one because they do think it's relevant to them and who they are. And that's fine. Right. So you sort of like as a coach, when you're learning how to take a history, you do have to develop this certain kind of people skills
Hmm.
so that they just always feel comfortable. And you just have to know that if you have a nice big toolbox, you can be working on all these things without even having conversations about them,
Yeah.
about certain issues, which is cool.
There's a psychology component to applied neurology. That
Yeah.
just sounds like heady stuff, man.
Yeah. Yes. And after this history taking thing goes down on day one, I hope that I have a little bit of time left, right, in this single session.
Right.
And so I will then take that time to start to run some assessments, right? And that's when I'm looking at gait, like we talked about, the thing I should have
Hmm.
been doing on day one, that I didn't do. When Igor told me, look at everybody's walking. So I look at a person's gait. I will then run them through some basic, what we call cerebellar assessments, where I'm
Hmm.
essentially testing people's coordination and their balance, because
Hmm.
that can give me a lot of information too. And at that point, I have a few ideas and a little bit of understanding about how they're moving. And I try to help them improve something. I might have 10 minutes left, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, you said you never touched your toes before, right, in your adult life? But you really wanted to do that because you like yoga. Let's see
Hmm.
if we can touch your toes right now.
Yeah.
And usually we can, which is awesome. And they're like, dude, who are you? And I'm like, listen, I didn't make it up.
Yeah.
This is just neurology, right? Like this is what's cool about it. And they're like, oh, so you mean we can actually work on these things? And it's like, yeah, we can. And then the process starts, and yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. I gotta say, you've got this is a really cool discipline and a really cool and fulfilling career, it sounds like. So
Yes, it is. It's exciting. It's very rewarding. It's challenging in all the ways that you wouldn't think it is, right? It's like
right.
the tactical part, the technical part, the theory, that
Hmm.
honestly is just about putting your time in.
Hmm.
But like with any kind of coach, the longer you coach a person, the more you realize, you know what? My success with this person comes down to their behaviors
Right.
and getting them to use the tool set that you have. And to me, that's like where the biggest challenge comes in. It's like, I can help you touch your toes on this first call if that's what you want to do. But, you've got these other goals and we're going to work towards them. And, we've now got to figure out how to start building this into your life so that you get enough of the right stuff for long enough to make change. And that's always the biggest challenge when you're coaching anybody in anything.
Yeah. I always say the hardest thing about any job is other people.
Yeah,
It's like the technical stuff you can learn. Personalities, that's tough. But
absolutely.
do you have any other thoughts on taking a history for this episode?
Just that if you're a health or movement professional and you're in a place where you don't feel handcuffed, right? Because some of our health professionals, sorry to say, you're handcuffed. You only have X amount of time with a person. You have to run a process a specific way, and it's usually not your own,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's hard, and I understand that. If you're in a place where you have the freedom to start to learn how to take a history, I really encourage you to do it. It's not going to be easy. It does feel awkward at first, but what happens over time is you learn and you start to figure out your own unique method for it and the process that you want to go through, and it just gets easier and easier, and it will really, really help you. Clients like to feel like they are being listened to, right? Because that's what's missing in a lot of movement and healthcare, right? In the movement and
Yeah.
healthcare world, it's like we always wonder, like, is anyone listening, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, especially if you're dealing with pain issues, a lot of people already feel a bit hopeless at times because it's a very difficult industry to navigate, and your health is very difficult to navigate because there just isn't good foundational education, right, for us early on in life to learn these things about our health. So it's difficult. And if you really want to become a good practitioner, all right, a good coach, good personal trainer, you have to spend the time little by little over the years taking a good history, and it will up your game like you won't believe. It'll help you really identify all these little things that you can use in your work. And for me now, where I am years later, I am finding that the history is becoming what I focus on the most. And I've actually been able to predict my clients' assessment outcomes based on the history that they're giving me. So it's actually
Mm-hmm.
made me even faster. And that I find to be really, really cool. All right, Tony, there it is, a little bit on history taking. And I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to that. Listen, something that I wanted to tell everybody is that there are tons of people who were not feeling like they were in a place to take our Neuro Dojo course right now. And if that's you, don't worry. The course is coming back. We only teach it once a year right now, but it is coming back, so you still have a chance. However, I was just talking with my wife, Alicia, and we've been putting our heads together lately on essentially what is going to be a rebrand of our monthly membership. Now, it's not going to be a rebrand in terms of changing everything. Everything that already exists inside our monthly membership, like programs to support you, mobility programs, strength programs, it's all going to stay there where it is right now. But what we're going to be doing in the future is building in more neuro education into the monthly membership, because right now people assume that it's just a place where you sign up and you do mobility programs or you do strength training programs. In the future, we're going to be moving more and more towards education. And we really want our monthly membership to be kind of a stepping stone into the Neuro Dojo.
Mm-hmm.
But we also want it to work in the reverse so that people who take the Neuro Dojo can then join our membership and continue with long-term support in the process of becoming better with applied neurology. So we're very excited about that. And the thing that I wanted to tell people is that if you are on our email list or you were part of the free Neuro Masterclass that I hosted before the Neuro Dojo got started, if you saw that, you're likely on our email list. Make sure that you are on our email list, because we will not be advertising publicly, but we're going to come back around and give people a great opportunity and deal to come into the membership. So for those of you who were kind of bummed out that you didn't get to do the Neuro Dojo for whatever reason, and you want to get deeper into the applied neuro work, our membership is going to be able to support you in that way. So keep your eyes peeled for emails that you'll get from us in the near future that will help you get involved with the dojo. So that's it for today. I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode, and thank you all for your support. And we will see. Oh, I was going to do it again. We won't see you soon. That's what I say on YouTube. You will be hearing us soon. All right, guys. Peace out.
That's funny.
That is.